You're suspended. Nick Aldis drops the hammer. Drew McIntyre suspended from SmackDown. WWE just destroyed one of their top stars on a whim, and nobody in management seems to understand what they've just done to their own product. Drew McIntyre, a former WWE champion, a main event talent, someone who's been carrying SmackDown for months, got suspended indefinitely by Nick Aldis in a segment that makes zero sense when you actually think about it for more than 5 seconds. And the worst part? This isn't even about disciplining Drew for something legitimate. This is WWE once again sacrificing long-term storytelling and character consistency for a cheap shock moment that's going to blow up in their faces within 2 weeks. But here's what they're not telling you about why the suspension really happened, and when you find out the real backstage reason Drew got pulled from television, you're going to lose your absolute mind at how petty and short-sighted this company can be when egos get involved. Let me paint the picture of this absolute train wreck of a segment. SmackDown is rolling along, and Drew McIntyre comes out to cut a promo. Now, Drew's been on fire lately with his promos, intense, passionate, real emotion behind everything he says. He's talking about injustices, about being overlooked, about management making terrible decisions. It's compelling television because Drew is selling it like his life depends on it. And then Nick Aldis, the SmackDown general manager who has the charisma of a wet paper bag and the authority of a substitute teacher, interrupts him and says that due to Drew's unprofessional conduct and disrespect for management, he's being suspended indefinitely from SmackDown. No warning, no hearing, no due process. Just boom, you're gone, get out of my ring. The crowd is confused. Commentary is trying to sell it like this is some major moment. And Drew, to his credit, is acting like this is the biggest injustice in wrestling history. He's shouting at Aldis, he's refusing to leave, security has to escort him out. It's dramatic, it's emotional, and it's complete and utter nonsense when you think about the implications for more than 10 seconds. Here's my first question, and I need you to really consider this: in what world does suspending your top heel right before your next major pay-per-view make any sense from a booking perspective? Drop your thoughts below because I'm genuinely baffled. Let's start with the most obvious problem. Drew McIntyre is one of SmackDown's top stars. He's in the middle of feuds with multiple people. He's been built up as a main event threat. He moves merchandise. He gets reactions. And WWE just pulled him off television with no clear return date? What happens to all his storylines? What happens to the people he was feuding with? Do they just wait around? Do they move on to other opponents? Either way, you've just created a massive hole in your roster that you now have to scramble to fill. And let's talk about Nick Aldis as an authority figure, because this is where things get really insulting. Nick Aldis has been SmackDown GM for months now, and he has zero credibility in this role. He's been portrayed as weak, indecisive, and easily manipulated by the roster. Wrestlers openly disrespect him. He makes arbitrary decisions that make no sense. He's basically been a punching bag for every heel on the roster. And now, suddenly he's supposed to be this strong authoritative figure who can suspend a top star? Where was this backbone for the past 6 months? Why does he suddenly have the power to make these decisions when he's been portrayed as powerless this entire time? It's inconsistent character writing, and it's lazy. WWE wants to have their cake and eat it too. They want Aldis to be a sympathetic, overwhelmed authority figure when it suits them, but then they also want him to be able to drop the hammer when they need a dramatic moment. You can't have it both ways. Pick a characterization and stick with it. Either Aldis is weak and ineffective, or he's strong and commanding. You can't flip-flop based on what's convenient for this week's storyline. Question for everyone who's been watching SmackDown regularly: do you actually buy Nick Aldis as an authority figure who has real power, or does he feel like a complete joke who's just reading lines off a script? Be honest in the comments. Now let's get to what really happened backstage, because this is the part that's going to make you furious. Multiple sources, and I'm talking reliable people with direct knowledge, have indicated that Drew's suspension wasn't a creative decision made by the writing team. It was a political decision made by someone high up in management who felt that Drew was going into business for himself with his recent promos. Apparently, Drew has been pushing boundaries with what he's allowed to say, taking subtle shots at WWE's booking decisions and management, and someone didn't like it. So instead of having a conversation with Drew like adults, instead of adjusting the content of his promos, they just pulled him off television entirely. Let me be crystal clear, I cannot confirm this with 100% certainty because nobody's going on the record. But when you talk to multiple people and they're all saying the same thing, when you look at the context of Drew's recent work and how suddenly this suspension came out of nowhere, the pieces fit together. This wasn't about Drew doing something wrong on camera. This was about someone backstage being petty and vindictive because Drew was getting too much creative freedom and saying things that hit too close to home. And if that's true, if Drew really got suspended because he was cutting promos that were too real and making management uncomfortable, then that's absolutely disgusting. That means WWE punished one of their hardest workers, someone who's been loyal to the company for over a decade, someone who always delivers, just because he made someone in the back feel insecure. That's not how you run a wrestling company. That's how you kill morale and drive talent away. Think about this: if Drew can get suspended for speaking too much truth in his promos, what does that tell every other wrestler in the locker room? It tells them to stay in their lane, don't rock the boat, don't say anything controversial or interesting, just read your scripted lines and don't add any personality. Is that the kind of wrestling you want to watch? Robotic promos with no emotion or authenticity because everyone's afraid of getting punished for showing some personality? Here's a thought experiment: can you name a truly great promo from the last 5 years that didn't involve the wrestler going at least slightly off script or saying something that management probably wasn't thrilled about? I'm willing to bet most of the promos you remember involve someone taking risks. Let's talk about Drew's character and why this suspension makes no sense within the context of his storyline. Drew has been portrayed as this rebellious, anti-authority figure who doesn't care what management thinks. He's been fighting against the system, calling out injustices, demanding respect. So what does WWE do? They have the authority figure suspend him, which proves Drew's point. It validates everything he's been saying. It makes him more sympathetic. It makes the audience want to see him come back and get revenge on Aldis. Unless that's the point, unless this is all building to some big return angle where Drew comes back and destroys Nick Aldis and takes over SmackDown or something. But based on WWE's track record, do we really think they've thought that far ahead? Or is this more likely just a reactive decision that they're going to have to scramble to turn into a coherent story later? And here's another problem: what is Drew supposed to do during this suspension? Is he just off TV completely? Does he show up on Raw instead? Does he cut promos on social media? Does he go back to Scotland and wait for WWE to call him back? Because if he's just gone with no presence whatsoever, the audience is going to forget about him. That's how television works. Out of sight, out of mind. You can't just remove a top star for weeks or months and expect people to still care when they come back. WWE has tried this before with other wrestlers, and it rarely works the way they want it to. Remember when they suspended Daniel Bryan in 2010 for that tie incident? They thought it would blow over and they could bring him back stronger. Instead, it killed his momentum and they had to rebuild him from scratch. Remember when they fired CM Punk multiple times as part of storylines? It worked sometimes and other times it just confused the audience. Suspension angles are hard to execute properly because you're removing someone from the show, which is the opposite of what entertainment television is supposed to do. Quick question: have you ever stopped watching a show because your favorite character got written off temporarily? Did you come back when they returned, or had you moved on by then? I think this is more common than WWE realizes. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Drew McIntyre has been one of the best things about SmackDown for the entire year. His matches have been consistently great. His promos have been passionate and compelling. He's been getting genuine reactions from the crowd, sometimes cheers, sometimes boos, but always loud reactions, which is what matters. He's been doing everything WWE has asked of him and then some. And this is how they reward him? By suspending him in a segment that makes him look weak and management look petty? Compare this to how WWE treats their other top stars. Roman Reigns can disappear for months at a time and come back whenever he wants with no consequences. Brock Lesnar worked a part-time schedule for years and was always positioned as the most dangerous guy in the company. Cody Rhodes gets to have creative input on his storylines. But Drew, who shows up every week, works his ass off, never complains publicly, gets suspended for unprofessional conduct? What conduct? What did he actually do that warranted this? In the storyline, they're being deliberately vague about what Drew did wrong. Was it disrespecting Aldis? Wrestlers disrespect authority figures every week on WWE television. Was it being too aggressive? Drew's entire character is being aggressive. Was it something he said in his promo? Then what specifically? The lack of clear justification makes this feel arbitrary and unfair, which I guess is the point if you're trying to get sympathy for Drew, but it also makes WWE as a company look incompetent at running their own show. Let me ask you this: if you were Drew McIntyre right now, how would you feel about this suspension? Would you see it as part of a larger storyline that's going to pay off? Or would you be wondering if WWE actually values your contributions? Here's what makes me really angry about this situation: WWE has a pattern of misusing Drew McIntyre. They've fumbled his booking multiple times over the years. His first WWE Championship reign during the pandemic era should have been this massive moment, but it happened in front of no fans, so it felt hollow. They've started and stopped his pushes multiple times. They've turned him heel and face seemingly at random. They've put him in feuds that go nowhere. And just when it seems like they're finally figuring out how to use him properly, they do something like this that completely derails any momentum he had built. Drew is 38 years old. He's not a young up-and-comer anymore. He's in the prime of his career right now, and every month that WWE wastes with bad booking is a month he'll never get back. This should be the period where Drew is main eventing WrestleMania, having classic matches, cementing his legacy as one of the all-time greats. Instead, he's getting suspended on a random SmackDown in November because somebody backstage has an ego problem. And think about the opportunity cost here. Every segment that Drew is off TV is a segment where someone less talented, less over, and less interesting has to fill that time. Every match he's not having is a match the audience would rather be seeing. Every storyline he's not involved in is a storyline that's probably not as compelling as what he could be doing. WWE is actively making their own show worse by suspending one of their best performers. Let's talk about the reaction this got. The live crowd didn't really seem to understand what was happening. There was confusion more than heat. Social media is split between people defending it as part of a storyline and people, like me, calling it out as terrible booking. Wrestling media is speculating about what this means for Drew's future. And through all of this, WWE hasn't clarified anything. They haven't explained the suspension length. They haven't outlined what Drew needs to do to get reinstated. They've just left everyone hanging, which is either brilliant long-term storytelling or complete incompetence, and based on the evidence I'm leaning toward the latter. Trivia time: Drew McIntyre has won the WWE Championship twice. Can you name both opponents he defeated to win the title each time? Let's see who the real Drew fans are in the comments. Here's my biggest fear about where this goes. WWE is going to keep Drew off TV for 2 or 3 weeks, realize they actually need him for a pay-per-view match or because SmackDown is struggling without him, and they'll just bring him back with minimal explanation. Nick Aldis will be like, "You've served your suspension," and Drew comes back and everything goes back to normal. No character growth. No payoff. No consequences for Aldis. Just a complete waste of time that accomplished nothing except taking one of your best wrestlers off television for a few weeks. We've seen WWE do this exact pattern before. They create a dramatic moment, everyone speculates about what it means, and then it just fizzles out with no real resolution. Remember when they fired Sasha Banks and Naomi, and then they just came back months later and nobody ever really addressed what happened? Remember all those fired GMs and authority figures who came back like nothing happened? WWE has a terrible track record of following through on these dramatic power struggle angles. Question for the longtime fans: can you remember a time when a wrestler got suspended or fired as part of a storyline and it actually led to a satisfying payoff that was worth the time they were off TV? I'm genuinely struggling to think of examples. Now let's talk about what this means for the other wrestlers on SmackDown. If you're someone who was feuding with Drew, your storyline just got put on hold indefinitely. If you're someone who was scheduled to work with Drew in the coming months, those plans are now up in the air. If you're a mid-card wrestler hoping to move up the card, congratulations, there's suddenly an opening, but also, you just watched management suspend a top star for nebulous reasons, so maybe you should be worried about your own job security. This creates uncertainty throughout the entire roster, and uncertainty is bad for a wrestling show. You want your wrestlers to feel secure and confident so they can take risks and deliver their best performances. When management is arbitrarily suspending people, everyone becomes more cautious and less willing to push boundaries. The entire product suffers as a result. And let's talk about Nick Aldis's future as GM after this. If Drew comes back and there's no consequences for Aldis, then Aldis looks even weaker than he already did because his suspension meant nothing. If Drew comes back and destroys Aldis, then what was the point of giving Aldis this temporary moment of power? Either way, Aldis remains one of the least effective authority figures in recent WWE history, and I genuinely don't understand why they're keeping him in this role when it's clearly not working. Authority figures in wrestling can be great when done properly. Mr. McMahon was incredible. Eric Bischoff was compelling. William Regal in NXT was perfect. Even Adam Pearce on the main roster does a good job. But Nick Aldis has none of the qualities that make a good authority figure. He's not intimidating. He's not funny. He's not clever. He's just there, reading his lines and looking uncomfortable while wrestlers yell at him. Here's a blunt question: should Nick Aldis be replaced as SmackDown GM, and if so, who should replace him? Give me your fantasy booking in the comments. Let's consider the possibility that this is actually part of a brilliant long-term story that I'm not seeing. Maybe WWE is building to Drew coming back and taking over SmackDown. Maybe this is going to lead to a match at the Royal Rumble where Drew's reinstatement is on the line. Maybe there's a whole arc planned out where Drew becomes more dangerous and unhinged because of the suspension, and it leads to the best work of his career. Maybe. But here's the thing: even if that is the plan, did they need to execute it this way? Did they need to suspend him now, in the middle of his momentum? Could they not have built to this more gradually, with Drew getting progressively more uncontrollable until Aldis had no choice but to suspend him? Could they not have made the reasons for the suspension more clear so the audience understands why it's happening? Good storytelling shouldn't require the audience to make excuses for it or fill in the blanks themselves. And let's be real, WWE's track record suggests that this probably isn't part of some grand plan. This is more likely a short-term decision that they're going to figure out as they go, which is how WWE operates most of the time. They create a moment designed to shock and get people talking, and then they figure out the follow-through later. Sometimes it works. Usually it doesn't. And their willingness to sacrifice long-term storytelling for short-term reactions is why WWE often feels so frustrating and inconsistent. Here's what should happen moving forward, if WWE actually cares about making this work. Drew should be off TV for exactly 2 weeks, long enough for it to feel like a real suspension, but not so long that people forget about him. During those 2 weeks, he should be cutting promos on social media, building anticipation for his return. When he comes back, it should be explosive. He should cost Nick Aldis something important, or interfere in a major match, or do something that makes his return feel earned and impactful. And then there needs to be a real payoff where Drew gets his revenge on Aldis in a satisfying way. But I bet money that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is Drew disappears for a few weeks, comes back when WWE needs him for a match, cuts a promo about how being suspended made him even angrier, and then moves on to his next feud without any real resolution to the Aldis situation. It'll be unsatisfying, it'll feel incomplete, and we'll all wonder what the point of the suspension was in the first place. Final question, and I really want to hear everyone's take on this: do you think this suspension is going to help or hurt Drew McIntyre's character in the long run? Will he come back stronger and more over, or will this just be a forgotten chapter that wasted everyone's time? Here's the bottom line. Nick Aldis suspending Drew McIntyre from SmackDown is either incredibly brilliant long-term storytelling that we won't fully appreciate until it plays out, or it's short-sighted reactive booking that's going to blow up in WWE's face within a month. And based on everything we know about how WWE operates, based on their track record with these kinds of angles, based on the backstage politics that seem to be at play here, I'm betting on the latter. Drew McIntyre is one of the best wrestlers in the world. He deserves better than to be used as a pawn in whatever power struggle is happening behind the scenes. He deserves storylines that make sense and build his character. He deserves to be featured prominently on television, not suspended indefinitely for nebulous reasons that haven't been properly explained. And WWE deserves all the criticism they're getting for this decision, because it's emblematic of everything frustrating about how they book their shows. So yeah, you're suspended. Nick Aldis drops the hammer. Drew McIntyre is gone from SmackDown. That's your shocking moment. That's your dramatic segment. And if you're not asking questions about why this happened and what it accomplishes, if you're just accepting it as that's wrestling, then you're part of the reason WWE keeps making these same mistakes over and over again. Drew deserves better. We as fans deserve better. And until WWE starts thinking long-term instead of just looking for the next shock moment, we're going to keep having these conversations about wasted potential and frustrating booking decisions.